Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to the first edition of a brand new review series where I am going to be talking about the fourth and final season of Superman and Lois. And today I am going to be talking about episode 1, the season 4 premiere, the end and the beginning, which I have just finished watching. And oh my god! This episode, my goodness, was so epic, intense, raw, emotionally charged, hard hitting, you name it. This episode had it all and then some. And I've said before, I am really bummed out this is going to be the final season for Superman and Lois. But if this episode is the shape of what season 4 is going to be, then we are in for one hell of a final ride because my god, this was so good. And I have said this from the very beginning. This show has truly been a real breath of fresh air. And this episode had me right from the opening to the end. It had me completely on the edge of my seat and it just didn't let up. That's what I liked about this episode. It didn't let up, it didn't slow down, it was very well paced, and at times, and I've said this so many times before, this really felt like a mini movie. And I would put this up against any of the previous Superman movies because it was so good. You know, sometimes I forget when I watch this show, it's just a TV show. This could have easily been a Superman movie. It was so damn good. And wow. At times there were moments I did get a little bit teary, which I will get into in a moment, but my god, we have got a lot to talk about for the first edition of Superman and Lois Season 4 review series. And we're kicking it off in style. This packed a hell of a punch, pun intended. And the way this episode paid homage to the classic graphic novel, The Death of Superman, which is probably my all time favourite story arc. Yes, it's been done to death, no pun intended, but I think the way the show handled that story arc was very well done. And the ending that they came up with for the battle between Superman and Doomsday was quite different to the one I remember. I mean, there's been so many different endings for their battles. The one that I remember the most was from the graphic novel where Superman and Doomsday literally just knocked each other out cold. And Superman lived for about a minute and a half longer than Doomsday before he eventually died. You had another one from the Superman Doomsday animated movie, which, by the way, if you guys haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's just fantastic. Superman took Doomsday up into space and they both just crash landed on Earth at the same time. That was his unique way of taking him out. And you had the Death of Superman animated movie. My God, this has been done so many times, where you literally had Doomsday essentially just beat Superman to death, pretty much. And obviously, Batman v Superman done their take on the Death of Superman, where Superman sacrificed himself by using a kryptonite spear, and Doomsday stabbed him with his spike. Yeah, this has been done quite a lot, but I thought the way this show came up with the conclusion to their Titanic battle was certainly something I wasn't expecting. It was a little bit horrific, but I thought the way they handled it was very well done. And that's the beauty of this particular story arc, which is obviously what the show is going for. The way they handled this story arc, I mean, this is only episode one. We've got quite a fair bit to go before this season finishes to see how they'll conclude it. But the way they kicked this off, I thought was very clever because I'd been sitting there watching this episode thinking to myself, how are they going to pull this off? Because obviously the Justice League were a big part of it, if you remember the graphic novel. But I thought the way they did this was excellent, and I thought it was very well executed. So we're going to get straight into it. We're going to talk about episode one, the end and the beginning, which essentially picks up from where we left off at the end of season three, where Lex Luthor came out of prison. He captured Bizarro and essentially killed him multiple times in brutal fashion until eventually Bizarro mutated into Doomsday. And he unleashed Doomsday on Superman. They had a massive battle. Superman took the fight to Doomsday and took him into outer space on the moon so nobody would get hurt. So it would just essentially be Superman and Doomsday going at it. And the way season three ended was Superman and Doomsday flying into each other on collision, and that was how it ended, which to me was probably, as far as this show is concerned, the greatest cliffhanger slash ending I have ever seen for a show. And it really left you wanting more. And as I said, season four essentially just picks up right where we left off from the end of season three. So we see Superman's battle with Doomsday rages on. We see his cape is completely ripped off from his suit, and we see it floating around in space in a very chilling homage to the iconic shot at the end of Death of Superman with his cape like floating like a flag. And then we see back on Earth, Jordan uses his powers to put out the fire that Doomsday started. And Lois asks him to use his super hearing to try and locate her dad, Sam Lane. Now, for those of you who remember at the end of season three, Sam Lane was kidnapped by Gretchen, who turned out to be one of Lex Luthor's partners in crime, and we haven't seen him since. So for a good portion of this episode, Jordan is using his super hearing to try and locate him. We see Lex Luthor arrives in Smallville, staying in a dingy hotel, and is greeted by a woman named Amanda, who is essentially like his personal assistant. I'm guessing she's going to be his Mercy Graves, so to speak. We see that she's been handling his business affairs while he's been in prison. He name drops Elizabeth, who is later revealed to be Lex Luthor's daughter, and he decides to stay at the Pomona Hotel because it overlooks Lois's place of work, the Smallville Gazette. We also see Sam is taken out of the trunk of the car by Otis and Gretchen, but Jordan still can't hear him, and Jordan is filled with doubts and worries about Superman, but Jonathan reassures him that Dad can take care of himself, just keep the hope alive. And we also see in the Kent's house, Lois remembers what it was like the first time Clark told her that he's Superman and all the questions she had. So we got to see a number of different flashbacks throughout this episode. The first time when Clark revealed to Lois he was Superman, and when they officially declared their love for each other and had an intimate moment. And one little detail which I thought was hilarious, and I don't know if this was needed, but I thought the way they did it was quite funny. Clark revealed that he was a virgin because when he said, "Oh no, I can't," I thought it was because he was Kryptonian and he was worried he might hurt her. Now, we've seen this sort of thing been addressed a number of times in Superman media. That's what I thought he was alluding to, that he can't do it with Lois because he's worried he might hurt her because of his powers. They've kind of touched on this quite a lot and very deeply in Smallville, but it's because he was a virgin. So I thought that was quite funny the way they snuck that in there. I would have thought they would have probably have done something like that in season one, but it's okay. It didn't really hurt the episode. I thought it was nice they added a little bit of humor because this episode was really dark, really intense. So to add a nice little bit of humor in there was cool because you need stuff like that. When you've got something so dark and emotionally charged, you kind of need that little humor just to keep things balanced out. Otherwise, it could run the risk of being all doom and gloom. And, obviously, this is what the theme is all about, doom and gloom. But I thought having a bit of humor kind of brought it up a little bit. So I thought that was very clever. We then see in the present, Lois tries desperately to contact Superman with the signal device, but to no avail. And then we see back in outer space, Superman's battle with Doomsday has moved past the moon, and they're still going at it. Wow. I'll tell you something. If I was to cut all of the emotional stuff and just kept the battle, could have easily been a Superman movie. Easily. That's how good this episode was. So we see Lois returns to the Gazette to write her article, which was named Superman in Peril. Lex Luthor confronts her and again demands she retires. Lois doesn't back down and wants to know where her dad Sam is. And it's here we learn that, as I mentioned earlier, Elizabeth is Lex Luthor's daughter and she broke contact with him after he was locked up. Luthor wants Lois to suffer the way he did, and he takes a copy of her article. I've got to say, I'm not the biggest Lex Luthor fan. Michael Rosenbaum has his place for me. To me, he is the quintessential, definitive Lex Luthor. But Michael Cudlitz, who was cast as Lex Luthor back in season 3, he is damn scary as Lex Luthor. He really is. The shaved head and that big, long, humongous beard, which we obviously do see in the trailer, he does eventually cut it off. He is so scary because Lex Luthor, you know, through all the different versions and portrayals we've had, Lex Luthor has always come across as a bit of a goofball. Yes, he's smart. He's always said that I'm the greatest criminal mind that ever lived, blah, blah, blah. Michael Rosenbaum's the best Lex Luthor. As I said, he has his place. But, his Lex Luthor, the way he was built up was done very well. But this Lex Luthor, in this show, I wouldn't want to be on his bad side. He's not the renegade criminal scientist from the comics. He's not the kingpin like businessman like he was in the DCAU and in the more recent comic books throughout the 90s. This Lex Luthor, he's just a straight up thug. He's just a straight up monster who just doesn't care how he gets his own way as long as he does. And he's just absolutely intimidating. And the scene that he had with Lois, I thought he was going to rip her throat out because he was so scary. And Elizabeth Tulloch, the way she played her scene as Lois was so badass because most Loises I remember, with a couple of exceptions, she was always played up as the damsel in distress. Superman comes to the rescue and saves the day and, all that stuff. This Lois, I swear to God, I thought she was going to kick him in the nuts because she just wouldn't back down. And I loved that. I really did. And I thought both of them did an amazing job in this scene. We then see Lois has another flashback, this time just after Lois and Clark got married, and she watches a news report about a fight between Superman and Intergang. We see Clark returns to the Daily Planet, and Lois has to remove a shard of kryptonite from his neck. Clark reassures her that he's not going anywhere, and he didn't even notice there was kryptonite on his neck. We also see Gretchen, who kidnaps Sam, isn't really Gretchen, has him tied up in an empty building. He refuses her offer of water and tells the Department of Defense they won't negotiate with her, and he manages to escape, but then gets knocked out again by Otis. And then we see Jordan is still struggling to find Sam, and he blames himself for setting Sam up with Gretchen. And Jonathan says, "Nope, this is not your fault." And he convinces Jordan to join him at the diner. Now, this episode really dealt with Jordan's grief about his dad being missing. Jonathan is handling it better, but Jordan has got this huge responsibility. Can I be the hero that Dad was? Can I be the man that he was? And that really deals with that a lot in this episode. And it does carry on into episode 2, which I will talk about later on. But man, this was straight up great storytelling. We see Luthor calls Gretchen and orders her to shoot Sam twice, one in the head and one in the heart. Sam is able to lower her defenses, and as I said, he escapes. We see Lex Luthor goes to the diner where Jordan and Jonathan are and shows them a picture of his daughter and says Lois is the reason his relationship with Elizabeth ended. And Lex promises that he will not rest until all of Lois's family suffers. Wow. And we get another flashback, this time with Lex Luthor with long hair, which is kind of like a homage to Alexander Luthor III from the comics, where he had this massive long hair. So it was quite weird seeing Lex Luthor with lots of hair. And he tries to get Lois to kill her story because she is working with false information. Lois refuses to back down, and Lex Luthor essentially threatens the Daily Planet and Superman. We then see Jordan and Jonathan go to see Lois at the Gazette to talk about their visit from Lex Luthor. Jordan wants to do something about it, but Lois warns them both to stay away from him. She wants Jordan to focus on finding Sam. Meanwhile, we see Sam doesn't get far in his escape. Otis captures him, and he and Gretchen take Sam to a dark area with the intention of burying him alive. My God. Luthor arrives and wants to torture Sam for his escape attempt. Sam taunts Luthor about Elizabeth, and Luthor taunts Sam with Lois. It's his article, Superman in Peril, before kicking him into the grave pit, and then Otis buries him with tons and tons of dirt. Good God. Lois thinks back to the painful process of giving birth to Jordan and Jonathan, which we see in another flashback. She refuses Clark's offer to take her to the fortress, and Clark stays by her side. And then we see in the present, Jordan almost finds Sam, but then loses him. But he's able to get a hold onto Gretchen's location. We see Jordan gets his suit on, carries Lois to where Otis and Gretchen are. Jordan tosses Otis aside, and Lois gets Gretchen to admit where they buried Sam. Jordan locates him with his X-ray vision and then digs him out with his super speed. Sam is safely brought to the hospital, and he wants to talk to Lois without Jordan and Jonathan present. Luthor looks at a picture of Elizabeth and tells Otis and Gretchen to lay low. They warn him about this Superboy, which is Jordan, of course, and the gears turn in Luthor's head. And at the hospital, Lois worries about Luthor continuing to come after them, and Sam tries to put her fears to rest. And then we cut back to space, where we see Doomsday throws Superman against an asteroid. Doomsday charges at Superman. Superman uses his most powerful blast of heat vision, and there's this really cool shot of Superman and Doomsday facing off, which is essentially like an homage to the graphic novel of Death of Superman. And we see it's not enough to stop Doomsday. And we see Doomsday has been adapting and adjusting to Superman's attacks. And at this point, he was strong enough to deliver a real fatal blow, which was rip Superman's heart from his chest. My God. They've essentially outdid themselves on this one because, as I said, if you read the graphic novel, they literally knocked each other out. I thought that was how it was going to end, but it didn't. But to rip Superman's heart out of his body, ugh, my God. Just as Lois and the boys return home, Jordan's hearing lets him know that Doomsday is coming back to Earth. The Kents make their way to town, and Doomsday lands and drops Superman's lifeless body as we see Doomsday flies away and returns to Lex Luthor. And Lex Luthor asks Doomsday, I believe you have something for me. And Doomsday throws Superman's heart on the floor. My God. Now, there was another interesting thing in this episode that I really wanted to touch upon. Brainiac was referenced. I had to go back and hear that again because I wasn't entirely sure if I misheard it. Brainiac was referenced in this episode. And there are rumors going around that we could see Brainiac in this season and Tom Cavanagh could be playing him. If that is true, if we're getting Brainiac in this season, played by Tom Cavanagh, this show has really outdone itself. Lois is horrified by Superman's body and tries to shield her sons from the sight. Jordan worries about not being able to hear Superman's heartbeat as Lois cries, all distraught, that Superman died before her. And Lois turns Superman's body over and sees his whole chest completely ripped open. And as I said, we see Doomsday returns to Lex Luthor and gives him Superman's heart. And we see at the end, Lois is full of grief and anger as she looks up at the hotel that Lex Luthor is staying at. And that concludes my review on episode 1, The End and the Beginning. Overall, this episode was fantastic beyond words. Certainly as good as a movie. Dark, intense, violence, everything you wanted. Emotionally charged. This didn't disappoint. Wow. The Brainiac reference, Milton Fine, all this stuff. Oh my God. This episode really set the tone for what season 4 is going to be all about. I am bummed out this is the final season, but wow, we are really determined to go out with a massive bang, and this episode was off to a great start. You could not ask for a better premiere than this, but wow, this was unbelievable. Loved every second of this, didn't disappoint once. So that's going to be it from me. I am going to wrap this up now. What was your thoughts on episode 1, The End and the Beginning? Did you enjoy it? Do you think this episode did a great job in paying homage to the death of Superman? What about the Brainiac reference that we got? Do you think that's going to lead to an eventual appearance from Brainiac? And also, now that Superman is dead, how do you think he's going to come back? What plans do you think Lex Luthor has for Lois and the Kents? You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below. And I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Superman and Lois Season 4 review series, where I'm going to be talking about episode 2. So make sure you don't miss that. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.